What would it take for Indonesia to stay on track with this ambitious target? Is there anything we can learn from past episodes of geopolitical rivalry to cast Indonesia's target into context?
Let me share with you one episode back when I was chairman of the investment board, the Minister of Investment, like Pak Rosan is have this job now. It was back on 2011, if I'm not mistaken, Timer. There was a big flood in Thailand. Yeah. As a result, Toyota could not produce their production in Southeast Asia because this big flood in Bangkok.
I remember.
Yeah, if you recall. I was a chairman of the investment board. So I went to Tokyo to meet Akio Toyoda. At that time, he was the CEO of Toyota. And I spoke to Toyoda-san. I said that this is about the time for you to invest in Indonesia. And then he asked me, why? And I said, not because Indonesia is better than Thailand, but you need to diversify your risks. Because if something natural disaster happen like what was happening at the time in Bangkok, you cannot produce, your supply chain stop. You know, there is a supply chain disruption. It is better for you to have, you know, some production base in Southeast Asia. And Indonesia is one of the options. So I was able to convince him. Toyota decided to put the production base $3.7 billion US, not because Indonesia better than Thailand, because there is a need for Toyota to diversify the risk. And I can see the similar analogy now. Many production base in China should be relocated, not to other Southeast Asian countries, not because we are better than China, but they need to diversify the risk now because the geopolitical tension. And if you're talking about Vietnam, is probably overcapacity at this moment, right? So Indonesia is very important. So if Indonesia would like to maintain this 8% economic growth, we can take this opportunity, provided that we do the economic deregulation.
A very critical point related to that issue. Okay, you are convincing a foreign investor that from a risk diversification perspective, it makes sense to invest in Indonesia. What about the fact, related to your earlier point, that even during GFC, this country did not lose growth momentum the way most open economies in the world did? Do you consider that also as an important resilient factor?
I couldn't agree more with you. I think we have to change our strategy, Timer. Many people believe, including I believe that many investors here, always talking about one of the attraction for investors to invest in Indonesia because huge domestic market. If people talk about India, huge domestic market, but let me put this way. Indonesia, India, and China have this huge domestic market since century ago, but they only grew. China only in the 80s, India only in the 90s, Indonesia only in the mid 80s. Why? And when they started to connect the domestic economy into the global economy. India did the reform under Manmohan Singh in the early 90s. China ascension to WTO. Indonesia introduced the economic deregulation in the mid 80s. So the way I look at it, if we want to promote the economic growth, it should be export-oriented sector. You put Indonesia as a production base to serve the global economy. Because the issue with Indonesia, even though we have this huge domestic market, the purchasing power is relatively low. You won't be surprised, I don't know whether you'll be surprised, the number of subscribers of Netflix in Indonesia is smaller than the number of subscribers of Netflix in Singapore, because the issue of purchasing power, right? So I think if we want to pursue the economic growth, we should follow the Vietnam style, export-oriented, financed by the foreign direct investment.